When Princess Saera Targaryen heard her father dismiss her back to her bedchamber under guard, she rushed towards him, crying. Jaehaerys turned his back on his daughter, and Giles Morrigan of the King's Guard had to catch her by the arm and wrench her away. She would not leave of her own accord, so the guards were forced to drag her from the hall, wailing and sobbing and calling for her father. Even Septon Bath tells us Princess Saera might have been forgiven and restored to favour if she had just done as she was told, if she had remained meekly in her chambers, reflecting on her sins and praying for forgiveness. Jaehaerys and Alysanne met all the next day with Bath and Grand Maester Elsa, discussing what was to be done with the princess and the 6 sinners. The king was rightly angry and unyielding, for his shame was deeply felt, and he could not forget Saera's taunting words about his uncle's wives. "She's no longer my daughter," he said more than once. Princess Saera clearly hit a nerve talking of Maegor, who had killed Jaehaerys' elder brothers. Queen Alysanne could not find it in her heart to be so harsh. "She is our daughter," she told the king. "She must be punished, yes, but she is still a child, and where there is sin, there can be redemption. You reconciled with the lords who fought for your uncle, and you forgave the men who rode with Septon Moon. You even reconciled with the Faith and with Lord Rhaegar when he tried to steal your crown, tear us apart, and put Arya on your throne. Surely you can find some way to reconcile with your own foolish daughter." The queen's words were soft and gentle, and Jaehaerys was moved by them. Septon Bath tells us Alysanne was stubborn and persistent, and she had always had a way of bringing the king around to her own point of view, no matter how far apart they had been at the start. Given more time, she might have softened his stance on Saera, but Alysanne would not have the time she needed. That very night, Princess Saera sealed her own fate. Instead of remaining in her rooms as she had been instructed, she slipped away while visiting the privy, donned a washerwoman's robes, stole a horse from the stables, and escaped the castle. She got halfway across the city to the Hill of Rhaenys, but as she tried to enter the dragon pit, she was found and taken back by the dragon keepers. Alysanne wept when she heard, as she knew her cause was hopeless. Jaehaerys was hard as stone. Saera, with a dragon, was all he had to say. Would she have taken Balerion as well? This time, the princess was not allowed to return to her own chamber. She was confined to a tower cell instead, with her mother's sworn shield, Jonquil Drake, guarding her day and night. Hasty marriages were arranged for her sisters in sin. Perianne Moore, who was not pregnant, was wed to Jonah Moon. "You played a part in her ruin. You can play a part in her redemption too," the king told the young lordling. The marriage proved to be a success, and in time the two became Lord and Lady of Maidenpool. Alice Turnberry, who was pregnant, presented a much harder case, as Roy Collington refused to marry her. "I will not pretend that Braxton's bastard is my son, nor make him the heir to Griffin's Roost," he told the king, in a show of defiance. Instead, Turnberry was sent to the Vale to give birth at a mother house on an island in Goldtown Harbour, where many lords sent their natural daughters to be raised. She gave birth to a red-haired girl, who was certainly Roy Collington's daughter. Afterwards, she was married to Dustin Pryor, the Lord of Pebble, an island off the Fingers. Roy Collington was then given a choice between a lifetime in the Night's Watch or 10 years of exile. Unsurprisingly, he chose exile and made his way across the narrow sea to Pentos and thereafter Myr, where he fell in with the Salsol Company. Only half a year before he might have returned to Westeros, he was stabbed to death by a whore in a Myrish gambling den. The harshest punishment was reserved for Braxton Beesbury. "I could geld you and send you to the wall. I could take your father's land and castle, but there would be no justice in that," Jaehaerys told the knight. "He had no part in what you did, no more than your brothers have. We cannot have you spreading tales about my daughter though, so we mean to take your tongue, and your nose as well I think, so you might not find the maids quite so easy to persuade. You are far too proud of your skill with sword and lance, so we take that away from you as well. We shall break your arms and legs, and my maesters will make certain they heal crookedly. You will live the rest of your sorry life as a cripple, but as any knight accused of wrongdoing has the right, you can prove your innocence in trial by combat." And trial by combat is what Braxton Beesbury chose. He was by all accounts an arrogant young man, sure of his skill at arms. He looked about at the 7 King's Guards standing beneath the Iron Throne, and said, "Which one of these old men do you mean for me to fight?" "This old man," announced Jaehaerys Targaryen, "the one whose daughter you seduced and despoiled." They met the next morning at dawn. The heir to Honeyholt was 19 years of age, the king 49, but still far from an old man. Beesbury armed himself with a morning star, thinking that may perhaps Jaehaerys would be less accustomed to defending himself against that kind of weapon. The king bore the Conqueror's Valyrian steel sword Blackfire. Both men were well armoured and carried shields. When the combat began, Beesbury rushed hard at the king, seeking to overwhelm him with the speed and strength of youth. making the spiked ball whirl and dance and sing. Jaehaerys took every blow on his shield, countering himself with defense, whilst the younger man wore himself out. Soon enough, the time arrived when Braxton Breezebury could scarce lift his arms, and then the king moved to attack. Even the best of mail is hard-pressed to turn Valyrian steel, and Jaehaerys knew where every weak point could be found. Breezebury was bleeding from half a dozen wounds when he finally fell. Jaehaerys kicked his shattered shield away, opened the visor of Breezebury's helm, and laid Blackfyre's point against his eye and drove down deep. Queen Alysanne did not attend the duel. She told the king she could not bear the thought that he might die. Princess Saera watched from a window of her cell. Jonquil Drake made certain that she did not turn away from the fight. A fortnight later, Jaehaerys and Alysanne gave another of their daughters over to the faith. Princess Saera, who was not quite 17, departed King's Landing for Old Town, where her sister, Septa Megella, was to take charge of her instruction. She would be a novice, it was announced, with the Silent Sisters. Septon Bath, who knew the king's mind better than most, would later maintain the sentence was meant to be a lesson. No one could mistake Saera for her sister Megella, least of all her father. She would never be a Septa, much less a Silent Sister, but she did require punishment, and it was thought that a few years of silent prayer, harsh discipline, and contemplation would be good for her, that it would set her on her path of redemption. That was not the path that Saera Targaryen cared to walk, however. The princess endured the silence, the cold baths, the scratchy rust-spun robes, the meatless meals. She submitted to having her head shaved and being scrubbed with horsehair brushes, and when she was disobedient, she submitted to the cane as well. All this she suffered for a year and a half. But when her chance came in 85 AC, she seized it, fleeing from the mother house in the dead of night and making her way down to the docks. When word of her flight reached King's Landing, it was assumed that Saera would be hiding somewhere in Old Town. But Lord Hightower's men combed the cities door to door, and no trace of her was found. It was then thought maybe perhaps she would make her way back to King's Landing, to the Red Keep, in order to beg pardon from her father. When she did not appear there either, the king wondered if she might have not flee to her former friends. Sir Jonah Mooton and his wife, Perianne, were told to keep close watch for her at Maidenpool. The truth did not come out until a year later, when the former princess was seen in a Lycian pleasure garden, still clad as a novice. Queen Alysanne wept to hear, "They have made our daughter into a whore. She always was," Jaehaerys replied bluntly.